Hey everybody, it's Bridget Murphy back again with my husband Ray, and we're super excited today. We have our trainer Jeremy from the Bay Area on today. Jeremy is, first of all, he's a dear friend of ours. We've known Jeremy long before we worked together, and we were so excited when he decided to come on board with Koru K9. He is our go-to with difficult cases, difficult behavior cases, and specifically aggression. So we wanted to bring him on today to talk about all things aggression. So I think we're just gonna hit the ground running. And this is, again, a common theme we are seeing with people right now is wanting to rush this process of dog training. So Jeremy, one thing that we're seeing is a lot of clients want to do shorter duration board and trains or quicker training to kind of, get results really fast. So let's talk a little bit why rushing isn't good, especially when it comes to aggression or difficult behavior cases. And maybe that can segue into some common mistakes that we see trainers who do rush things, those common mistakes that they make.
Yeah. So first, just trying to rush a program or trying to get into like a shorter duration program, it doesn't always really work out, mainly because we can only go as fast as the dog will allow us. And so first and foremost, we have to keep ourselves safe as the trainer and let the dog settle in. So a lot of these like severe aggression cases, it may be, 5, 6, 7 days before I can really even get to a lot of the training stuff. The rest of it is really just building a bond with the dog and trying to get the dog settled in here and getting the dog comfortable with me. So it all depends, and I know we'll kind of touch on it a little later, but it kind of depends on the type of aggression as well, of the approach, whether, some of these aggression cases, the dogs actually haven't bit anybody yet. So, that changes the approach as well, of like, has your dog actually bit somebody or another dog or something along those lines? Or is it, just been reactive so far, but you can see it building. And so those first few days, first week or so is pretty much lost just in getting the dog settled in and relaxed. And then we can start getting into things. So, there is a lot of other training companies out there that like to tout, and especially nowadays, hey, 2 weeks, we can fix all these things. And I tell clients when they mention those things, I promise you don't want to deal with the methods they're using, because they're not really trying to get to the root of the cause or root of the issues. So we really do with the aggression, we need that time, because everything's a progression. And one of the ways I like to look at that as well is, even once the dog comes home, is look at the grand scheme of, the dog's life. Even if it took us a year after the dog comes home, somebody sends us their 2-year-old that is now showing aggression, issues or things like that. And we do our, 4, 6, 8 week board and train, maybe add some private lessons on there and things like that. Which is all really, really good stuff, because it just helps us, one, keep track of kind of where the client is at in their progression with their dog, but two, like, we're in this as a team. We're in this together. I know pretty much all of us as dog trainers, especially with Koru, like, we get attached to the dogs too, and we are equally as invested in their success. So as we're continuing on with this, even if the client spent a year, trying to really hone in, taking their time and getting these dogs dialed in, well, when the dog's 10 years old, are they even going to remember that year? Chances are no. And so, and now they've just had the last, 9 years or whatever with like their perfect dream dog. Awesome. So if we put the effort and the energy in on the front end, we make it up on the back end, essentially. Does that kind of answer that question a little bit?
Yeah, I love what you said, because one, if for people who are watching this, if you go back to our last episode of It's Not Your Dog, It's You, you almost verbatim said a lot of things that Shane was saying too. And it's really important that people hear this, is we want to move at the speed of the dog. We don't want to force the dog to do things before it's ready. And taking a dog out of the home environment, particularly when there's severe behavior, is to me very beneficial for that dog. It's almost like hitting reset, So yeah, I love everything that you said right there.
So Jeremy, what kind of I guess, could you break down the types of aggression that you see out there, and then also some of the common mistakes I guess some dog owners have when they see behaviors like hurting behavior and things like that, when teeth are involved, everything becomes in this lumped category of aggression. I mean, what are the types of aggression, just for people who are out there who are kind of confused as to the dog's behaviors that you're seeing?
Yeah, I'd say mostly what we see is actually fear aggression. The dog's nervous about something, scared of something. And a lot of times people do misinterpret that for the dog as being, the dog's a super forward or dominant dog or something like that. And um, that forward aggressive dog is actually extremely rare. Those of us that have kind of played in the police dog world, the working dog world, we know, like, we hunt the world for those dogs, trying to put them into those environments. Not saying they don't come up, through our board and trains and things like that, because they do, but they're extremely rare. In most cases, when we get like bite histories and things like that, it's some type of stranger danger, fear issue, something along those lines, where the dog is uncomfortable. And I like to kind of think of dogs as like artificial intelligence. So they're always learning, whether we are formally training them or not. They're always taking in their environment and figuring out what has worked. And so we take these fear dogs that maybe are afraid of something. We put them in a situation they're scared. They react with biting something. And then now all of a sudden they were like, hey, I had success with that. That worked. That's how I get scary thing to go away. So then what happens next time they're in that same environment? They bite at it. Owner gets embarrassed and wants to pull their dog out. Whoever they were trying to bite or did bite is like, what the heck's going on? And they want to get out of there. And so now, again, we're now just reinforcing this habit and this behavior in this dog over and over and over, reinforcing it that, hey, when I'm scared, I bite it, it goes away. So fear aggressions, I'd say the biggest thing, but we do see a lot of kind of what you touched on is just herding behaviors, natural genetics. So I think that goes into dog selection and breed selection for people as well. Like, what's realistically the right dog for your lifestyle. And that's different for everybody, but, sometimes getting your border collie or your heeler while you're living in your studio apartment in the city isn't always the best idea, because those genetics are still there. And so they need a proper outlet for those genetics. And if we don't give it to them in some way, shape, or form, then they're going to find a way. So, something moves really quick. Well, they're going to run up and nip, right? And that's kind of what they're doing. And, corgis are a great example as well, because, everyone thinks, oh, these little corgis. And it's like, yeah, that little 35-pound, short-legged, dog is controlling 1,200-pound animals. And so, how are they doing that? They're tenacious. So even though, yes, they're cute, they're fluffy, everybody loves the little costume corgi contests, that you see going around. But realistically, there's a lot of that, kind of forward aggression there. And even in some cases there, it's somewhat of a fear behavior. And that's where we get into some of those nipping behaviors and things as well, is we have dogs that are fearful and retreat, and we have dogs that we refer to as kind of fear forward. And so a fear forward dog is going to get nervous about something, and it's going to go up and nip it first and then try to process, hey, what was that? And so we need to be able to kind of, one, recognize where that's coming from. And again, that will also change our approach with the board and train of where we're going with it. Like, where is it coming from? And that's where I'm a big believer of, is not going after, and this kind of actually goes back to the last question as well about, like, why board and trains are a certain length, is it's not about looking at the biting behaviors or the aggression and trying to just squelch that behavior. It's about figuring out where it's coming from, why, and then actually addressing that issue. So I always like to think that the aggression that we see in dogs, most of the time, it's a symptom, not the cause. And so if we have to go back and try to find what the root cause is, and then now address that, and a lot of times you'll see the aggression subside, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that again, a really good point to make, because a lot of times owners will ask us, like, why are we working on XYZ when my dog is biting people? Like, why aren't we directly targeting that behavior? And it's really when we want to peel back the layers of the onions, or the layer of the onion, like you said, and address that, because that is what will give you lasting results versus the Band-Aid approach or the quick approach. And I was sitting here on the side laughing because for those of you that don't know, Koru K9 was founded by Ray and I because we had a fear aggressive, high herding drive German Shepherd, Luna. So I'm laughing because I dealt with this. It's not fun and not an easy thing to overcome because you're dealing with the dog's lizard brain of what it's telling it to do at the same time. So I was giggling a little to myself there. One thing that kind of Ray and I were talking about too is common mistakes that we see other trainers who may not have the depth of experience in dealing with hard behavior cases like this and aggression. Let's talk a little bit about, let's just, hit it head on, why positive reinforcement only isn't going to be a great approach for dealing with these types of cases.
Yeah. So, as a trainer in general, like obviously I'm going to be very opinionated about pretty much every other trainer. Not that any necessarily one is right, wrong, or otherwise. The pure positive approach really is missing like 75% of kind of the psychological aspects that we're trying to hit with these dogs, the 4 quadrants as we talk about. So with pure positive, it comes into various factors. One, competing motivators. So when we get into, hey, our dog is, let's say it's a dog aggressive dog. We'll take something like that, or dog reactive dog. Well, we're out walking the dog on leash. That dog sees that dog. Well, what's going to have more value? That other dog, or, the piece of kibble, cheese, steak, whatever else I may have. Chances are that other dog's going to overpower that every single time. And so we're not going to get anywhere. Or 2, an approach that I'm not really a fan of is, hey, they see a dog, they haven't reacted yet, so now we're just going to reward it every time they see a dog. Well, now we're actually making that dog a big deal. We're making that dog a big important thing when it should just be like anything else we see down the street. So I try to take a similar approach to us as humans. Like when we walk down the street, we don't acknowledge every human we come across. Like we would never get anywhere. And so ideally, we just want to, kind of put our blinders on and just be able to walk and go. And we're trying to do that same thing with our dogs. So if we're constantly rewarding it for, looking at another dog and not, even if it doesn't react, we're still making that dog a big deal when it shouldn't be anything. It should be completely neutral and irrelevant. So that's kind of my approach on my take kind of on the pure positive aspect. Is it's just missing a lot, and there's no way to really reel it back in. Did you have something, Bridget?
I think it's Ray. No, Ray, we'll let you go in a second.
Yeah,
No,
sorry.
I
Yeah,
think
so-
that Jeremy touched on that is feeding the dog when it's walking, if it's reacting or not, because maybe that dog is like mean mugging the other dog. And so we're reinforcing that behavior, even if it's not an outward display of that aggression. We're ignoring the dog's state of mind at that point in time. But Ray, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Yeah, no worries. Just to dovetail off what you were saying, a lot of this could be traced back to socialization and the misconceptions around socialization. When you get these large organizations telling you to have the dog greet all these different dogs and greet all these people and all this external focus versus getting that attention onto you and creating neutrality around them. So whether you have a puppy that you're getting that from or an adult dog you've rescued, a lot of that stuff can be traced back to that socialization process, and I guess the confusion around what truly is socialization. I've had Shane and Damien kind of put their take on it, but just to get your opinion on what is your opinion on, these large organizations telling you to have your dog greet all these other things and basically have, free for all with puppies, and that's socialization. What does that entail? What does that create 6 months down the road when that dog starts to become an adult?
Well, Ray, I'm glad you asked. So realistically, I love the socialization topic actually, because one, it's gotten so muddied up and so messed up in the dog training world. And realistically, when we kind of look at the science and stuff of it, our socialization period with our puppies and our dogs it ends at around 16 weeks. That's kind of when those social, like those neural pathways and everything else shut down. And so are kind of close off in the brain. And it's really, really difficult for a lot of us because we also have the vet industry and things like that telling us, hey, don't take your dog anywhere. Don't do anything until it's fully vaccinated, which is now 16, 17 weeks old by the time you get that fully done. So now we're in this kind of catch-22. What do we do? So always, always, always err on the side of caution. But I'm a firm believer of taking puppies out and exposure work. So I stopped using the word socialization a long time ago. And I just always refer to it as exposure. Let's get the dogs out and expose them to something new. So let's say I've got a new puppy in that, whether I'm raising for myself or maybe like a police dog program or something like that. My rule of thumb is get the puppy out of the house somewhere every single day. And it has to go somewhere new at least once a week. And that's about it. Now, do I let it greet people? Sure, I'll let it greet some people here and there and stuff like that. But even then, out of the gate, I'm not really letting it socialize with other dogs other than maybe dogs within its own pack. So dogs within my household, or maybe I've got some, best friends with some dogs of similar ages that, of course, those dogs throughout their lifetime are going to be around each other. Sure, I'll let them play there. Otherwise, right out of the gate, I'm exposing my dog to all these different environments and things. People, dogs, noises, all that type of stuff. But I'm trying to keep their focus actually on me. We're working, that kind of keyword engagement. I'm always trying to keep them focused on me and paying attention on me. And where with that, we get kind of the end result of whenever the dog has a question and it doesn't know the answer to, it looks to me for the answer. So now, as it does get older, maybe there is a dog that we're walking down the street and the other dog's being a jerk and it's reactive and lunging at my dog. Instead of my dog, wanting to react to that, it's now looking to me for, hey, what am I supposed to do here? And letting me take kind of control and take charge. This actually all goes back to aggression as well, because ultimately, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get the dog to look to us for the answer. And the question may change, but the answers are almost always the same. So, the situation may change, but ultimately the dog coming back to me is always key. So the dogs, even as we get our adult dogs, let's say we rescue a dog and it's a year old, and it seems like it's been under socialized. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes it's just who the dog is. Sometimes it's just the genetic aspect. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. We just have to be able to work with that. And so, we have an older dog. Well, the way I look at it is, where is it at in its training level? So the age is somewhat irrelevant. It's where is its training level. So, if I get a 1-year-old dog from a rescue and it hasn't been properly socialized, I'm going to take those same approaches that I did with, say, an 8-week-old puppy. It's just now I'm doing it with a 1-year-old. So I'm still going to take it out into all these environments and all these different things. But again, the goal there is to expose it to the environments, but teaching it to ignore them at the same time.
So, yeah, that's a great answer. To go again, you're leading right into my next question, because you hear this all the damn time too, which is clients who don't know what they're looking at will look at this behavior and sometimes interpret this or think that their dog is protecting them. Can you explain what they're actually seeing and what this looks like?
Yeah, so it can feed off of a couple things. Like, virtually never is it the dog actually trying to protect the owner. It's the dog is trying to defend itself. And it kind of goes back to, again, something we've talked about already, is that artificial intelligence aspect of it, where the dog has had success now when it does lunge out and is being a jerk. It's, so it's scared. Hey, I'm going to lunge out and be a jerk first. And then now we're going to remove it from that situation. And so it's either one, had success kind of with that, or, it's either had success there or something along those lines. It's almost never that the dog is actually trying to protect the owner. If anything, the dog's trying to protect itself. And that's why we see some of that, like, lunging and reacting, is because it knows that's a way for it to get out of that situation. It's kind of a short answer there, but.
No, that was absolutely perfect. And it kind of led into another good question that I think dog owners don't understand is dogs have fight or flight. And so commonly when we see these behaviors, it's on leash or in a situation where the dog can't get out of there. And so we're going to see this dog aggress in some way because it can't escape. And so the owner thinks, oh, my dog's on leash and it's protecting me. And in some ways, I think people take that like, oh, how sweet, you know, my dog is protecting me. Again, let's not put humans' emotions on a dog. Like the dog's really scared and it needs the owner to step up. And yeah, so for the people out there who think their dog is protecting them, let's flip the script and have you protect your dog. But that actually does segue into a question that I wanted to ask when you were talking about reactivity. Let's talk about reactivity versus aggression, because I think there's a lot of confusion there with owners on what's the difference. So let's talk through that a little bit.
Yeah. So reactivity is, it kind of goes back to what you just said too, about like a lot of times with the dog that's reactive, when you do cut it off leash, it doesn't want to actually go and get into that fight. A truly aggressive dog wants that fight. And so we have to be really careful with that, because again, that's what it's looking for. Usually it's a more dominant behavior, whereas reactivity in most cases is coming from a more fearful side of it. And so yeah, like the forward aggression and things like that, like the dog really wanting to go look for that fight, that's a dog that's kind of in it to win it. So like we get into our terriers and things like that, like a lot of times that can be real aggression because that's where they're bred for. So again, like we get a lot of the calls, right, with our pit bulls or pit mixes and things like that, and they're dog aggressive. Well, yes, that's kind of what they were bred for. Now, that doesn't mean they're lost causes by any way, shape, or form, but we have to know that that's a real thing because that's what they were bred for. And so that's where, again, the training comes in, and we have to reel them in and kind of keep them focused on us and things like that. Whereas the reactivity, that's more or less an insecure dog that a lot of times we see this because we have a lack of structure in the home. A lot of times we see this because we have a lack of guidance and leadership. And so the dog's kind of looking to the owner to kind of take control, and the owner isn't really stepping up. So either the owner's just unsure of what to do, or just kind of letting the dog be all willy-nilly on the leash, and the dog doesn't really know what to do. So, you know, we're out walking along. I'm going to pick on old ladies for a minute. And, you know, we always get the old ladies with the retractable leashes and their little, you know, toy poodles on a leash. And they're walking down and they're not really paying attention. And little fluffies running around and, you know, marking on everything and running up to every other dog. And, you know, grandma's just walking around all fine. But a lot of times, like that type of behavior, if we're kind of taking grandma's approach to our walks, we're letting the dog make up its own mind and its own decisions. And so when it sees something that makes it uncomfortable, it now wants to react to try to scare it away in a sense. Whereas if we are now the leader, we are in control, our dogs are less likely to do something along those lines, stay kind of more focused on us and go that route.
So question regarding communication tools, or actually just tools in general, when you're dealing with aggression or reactivity or whatever it may be, it seems prong collars and e-collars seem to be the best tools for the most of the jobs. But can you explain why that is, and then why certain tools actually make the problem worse?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of I tell all of our clients, like, dog training is a big circle. Every single thing is related. So everything we do in the home is directly related to everything we do outside of the home. So when we get into training tools, they're extremely important, in my opinion, for not just trying to correct or squelch a behavior, but for communication mostly. That's 99% of what we're using them for. And so we need to kind of be able to, take control there. So why some tools may be worse, oftentimes we see harnesses, right? We think we're being really nice. We're going to put our dog on a harness and do things like that. Well, harnesses, one, we have zero control of the bitey end. We need to be able to control the head and mouth and know where it's going. And two, they give the dog all kinds of freedom. So when we look at, like, in the working dog world of any type, where do we see harnesses? sled dogs where they're pulling like freight trains, weight pulling competitions, pulling like freight trains. We get into our tracking dogs, search and rescue, anything like that, police work, or when we get into our, police dogs and bite work and things like that, we're using harnesses. Where we want to let the dog be free, we give them a harness. When we want to control the dog, we're using collars. So prong collars and e-collars are 100% kind of the go-to tools for that. And that's because we can also use them in a wide range of ways. It's not just, crank and release or anything like that. Like there's so much more nuance to it that I think does get lost a lot of the times on the general public. And so that's where those tools come in really, really handy. But even with those tools, they can be misused. Like I have this conversation all the time where I really wish e-collars specifically could only be purchased through a proper training company and through a trainer. There's so many issues we can create by using these tools without proper guidance that goes wrong. I actually just talked to one of our clients last night that I'm going to be getting next week. And she's, has a very aggressive large dog. And she said she tried a prong collar and it made the dog more aggressive. And I said, timing is everything. That's crucial, right? And like I said, everything's all related. So if we're not using it in the proper manner, we haven't put in the groundwork first, again, going back to that first week of our board and train and things like that, or first 2 weeks potentially of our board and train, if we haven't put in that groundwork, then we're going to set ourselves up for failure when we go to try to just use these tools. If we just slap them on, going back to those, we can fix your dog in 2 week companies. But if we just slap these tools on and try to crank on these dogs, it's not going to work. So prong collars are another example of that, where with proper timing and used appropriately, we can use it to redirect a dog, calm a dog down, reel it back in. But with the wrong timing, I've used it, again, with some of our police dogs and things like that. I've used prong collars to bring up aggression levels, right? You guys kind of remember my old girl, Kimber. And, when I was doing shits and stuff with her, she had a pretty lazy bark and hold. Well, I used a prong collar to bring up the aggression in her bark and hold, right? And so, used a prong collar, for example, or e-collar for that matter, used in the wrong timing. Say our dog sees another dog, it's ramping itself up internally. We miss that cue. Now we give it a pop on the leash or hit that button on the e-collar. The dog is so hyper fixated on that other dog that now it's taking it like as if that other dog just now did it to it. So now we're going to get that dog going from 0 to 100 right away. And so, yes, they're my favorite tools, but they need to be used appropriately and introduced through, proper training and things like that. Our training tools are nothing more than a form of communication, and they create their own language. And we have to explain to the dog what that language is before we put it in an environment where we're now asking it to understand that language, with the dog. Like, we're going to sit there and try to learn a little bit of Spanish before we go take our, spring break trip to Cancun. So, we want to figure those things out in a calmer setting. So, I know like we're big fans of like negative reinforcement and things like that, kind of teaching the dogs how to shut the pressure off and what these tools mean. And that's how we're going to go. So another reason that the prong and the e-collar are useful is, again, it goes back to that word I used earlier, the competing motivators. And so I'm just going to put random numerical values to things. So don't take this for anything, specific, but let's say we're walking along with our dog, and this is where e-collars are great because of the fine tuning that we can do with them. But let's say we're walking along with our dog and it sees a squirrel that it wants to react to, right? Well, if that squirrel is a level 8, on the dog's, attention scale, well, that means I have to go to at least a 9 to be able to beat out that squirrel. Right now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to a 50, because now we're kind of overcorrecting a behavior and we're shutting dogs down in inappropriate ways and things like that. But I do need to be able to beat out whatever that distraction is. And so dog sees squirrel's an 8. I can now apply that pressure with the e-collar or something, prong collar, to a 9, get the dog back to focus on me. Again, going back to that big circle of everything's related. I've already worked on engagement, eye contact, and the dog already knows the answer to that question when I apply that pressure. So now the dog can come back and focus on me. And as we get into heavier distraction areas, downtown areas, big cities, all that type of stuff, now we can really start honing that in to those different levels. Does that kind of make sense or answer that?
Yeah, that was perfect. I mean, I guess the other thing I used to tell clients is, your dog's got that fuse from 0 to 10, and those prong collars, e-collars are the only devices that break that escalation path if caught at like a 3. So what happens is when you start pulling on them with whether it's just a flat collar or a harness or whatever like that, it doesn't break that escalation path. So without that ability to tap someone in the shoulder, say, hey, pay attention to me, not what's going on over there, they're allowed to go escalate to that full 10 and go bananas at the end of the leash. So I think that's a really important distinction, and just to kind of put things in context as to how long it takes to figure out levels with an e-collar. And this is why I really advocate for people teaching recall first, because that is a safe way to find a dog's working levels with low, medium, and high distraction, just getting them to come back, so that at least in your brain, that if a squirrel comes running by and this dog is really into squirrels, it's going to take X amount of stimulation to get them to come down. But you're doing this all on a long line. You're doing this all incrementally over time. And that takes time. You have to bring the dogs to these different environments to find those levels before you let them free range, having an e-collar and being able to effectively, get your dog back without overcorrecting. So I think that's just a good thing for people to understand, especially when they're wondering about the timing and the duration of these board trains. Is there's no way to rush that process. You have to go on these scavenger hunts with these dogs for stimulation or whatever their triggers are, to be able to recreate these things at a distance, and then find out where those thresholds are, and then find out what the appropriate working level is to get the dog's attention without allowing that to get to that 10 mark and having them go bananas. So I think that's just a really good point, and it just kind of really illustrates the importance of these tools and why they need to be introduced properly and slowly, because there's no way to do it quickly, effectively, and truly know what you're doing. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
I kind of, oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
So yeah, I kind of take a similar approach, like the way I'm introducing the e-collars. Now I'm generally using extremely low levels. And I'm using it more sense to, again, when we get into our psychological quadrants, kind of the negative reinforcement aspect of it is the way I'm using the e-collar mostly. And I always tell everybody, like clients with kids will understand this a lot, is I say they're very much, toddlers are great at negative reinforcement, because what do? Usually we're on the phone, we're busy, we're hanging out with our friends or something like that. And what happens? The kid comes up, tugging on our shirt. Hey, finally we get annoyed and we're like, what do you want? Kind of Stewie from Family Guy has like the best kind of little example of that. But it's like, it's like, hey, what do you want? And they're like, hi. And they kind of just run off, right? Well, that's negative reinforcement. They did exactly, or we did exactly what they wanted us to do. They just annoyed the crap out of us until we did it. And so that's really what we're trying to do with the dogs. And so a lot of times, yeah, I'm pretty much introducing the e-collar on leash. And again, I'm starting at lower levels. We're using mostly the e-collar technologies collars, and I'm somewhere around between a 4 and an 8, honestly, with most of our client dogs is kind of where I find that initial, they're getting a response. And so kind of off topic of aggression a little bit, but it's like, what are we looking for with those responses? And it's like, I'm not looking for the dog to yelp. I'm not looking for the dog to be jumping 10 feet in the air, freaking out or anything like that. I'm looking for the dog just kind of giving some type of little, like, what is that? And so that can be an ear flick. That can just be a little bit like the eyes move a little bit, or it's trying to move away from the pressure. And so, okay, there's the level I'm looking for. So I want to see almost like the most subtle response ever. That's where I know the dog can feel it, and every dog's going to be a little different. And so I start out on leash, And generally by this point, I've done some leash work and rewarded mostly positive. And I've rewarded a lot of eye contact and a lot of the dog in that perfect position. So the dog has an idea of what I'm asking for already. And now I will quickly, I call it cutting squares. Ray, I know you're a Marine, and I am too. I was deployed on a ship, and that's what the ship would do sometimes when we were running a mission on land. Is it's just out in the ocean cutting a square. So all I do is I cut squares. I'm just walking in 90-degree angles and intentionally setting the dog up for a little bit of failure to where it's creating a little bit of that pressure on the leash. Now, throughout the board and train process, going into the length of it, I start with leash pressure. Most people are using a leash. The dog understands leash pressure. So if I've already explained to the dog, kind of some congruency throughout the training process here, if I've already explained to the dog how to shut on and off pressure with the leash and a collar, well, now all I'm doing is changing what the pressure feeling may be, but how to turn it off is the same. So as I cut that square, I add a little bit of that leash pressure, and I don't use a prong collar for this because I like the dog to feel the e-collar and everything directly. So little bit of pressure on the collar. At the same time, I'm applying that low level of stim, just that base level of where I know they're feeling it. They feel that pressure, they move into the right spot, pressure goes away. I set them up for failure again, and I move again. Little bit of that leash pressure, apply the pressure, they release the pressure, I turn it off. I use pressure a lot there, so hopefully that didn't get confusing. But so they feel it on their neck, I apply the e-collar stim at that low level, they start to come back to me, that the leash goes away, and so does the stim. So now they start to understand, hey, now we know how to turn this off. So now that makes sense. Now, a lot of times I go into our place command work and things like that. Well, I put the dog on place command, have the e-collar on, and now if the dog goes a step off the place bed, I kind of treat it like the ground is lava game. If anybody's played that or has kids that have played it, I'm sure you guys played it yesterday. If we kind of treat it like the ground is lava game, the dog's on its place bed, and the moment that foot steps off, I apply that low level stim. I've already explained to it outside on leash how to turn it off. It backs back up. And this is one of my favorite things to see when I'm doing this with the board and trains, because it almost makes me laugh. Like every time you can see the wheels turning of the dog, where it's truly clicking what the tool is doing. And you'll see them on their place bed, and then they'll take like 1 foot and they're just like, and then as moment it touches the ground, I apply that stim and they immediately go back, and you see them like, okay. And they'll go to a different spot on the place bed and they'll try it one more time, maybe with a different foot. Moment it touches the ground, apply that stim, whoop, they come back on and they're like, all right, I'm just going to lay down. Perfect. We now have created that safe space of where they know how to turn that pressure off. I'm now creating, and I refer to it as a safe space again, when we're out on our walks. What's our safe space? That good, proper heel position where the neck collar area is in line with our leg. Great. Now, anytime, doesn't matter if the dog's forward, back, sideways, doesn't matter. Anytime it's out of that position, if I apply that low level stim, the dog's going to move back into that spot to make that go away. So that's how I teach the dog how to control, essentially teach the dog that it has the power of the e-collar. And when I do it that way, it just seems to be really successful. And I'm kind of using a similar approach with the prong collar as well. As we all know, like these dogs, kind of going back to your tool question as well, like any dog, their neck is super, super strong. They have, disconnected tissue there and things like that. And even a prong collar, they can just lay into it all day. It's not going to have an effect. And so we have to teach them how to kind of turn those things off.
This was great. I thought all of this was really great. And I loved your description of the hot lava game, because I think one of the root causes, there's many, but one of the causes of aggression is the lack of consequences in a dog's life or consistency. And so that's kind of one thing I wanted to back up and talk about a little bit, is what feeds into this behavior. And talking about that is really spot on. With a lot of times owners will, let the dogs get away with certain things. And that is how we see this behavior just stack over time. So, and I know this is a question that could this is like opening a can of worms, but let's talk about some of the common things that you see owners inadvertently and unknowingly do to basically cause the behavior of aggression. And just to like disclaimer this, aggression, as Jeremy said, is a symptom of a root cause. And so that's where I really wanted to talk about what drives aggression in most cases of what we see. Or like, I know fear, but what causes that fear?
Yeah. So as you said, it is a can of worms in a lot of ways, but so a lot of things can kind of cause it. So first and foremost is lack of structure in the home. So again, let's break down our dogs, and obviously, you know, our doodles and stuff nowadays are pretty far removed from the wolf, but a lot of those primitive behaviors are still there. Just like we have a lot of similar primitive behaviors to, you know, cavemen and whatever else, like primitive man. Those our doodles are kind of similar. I love doodles, by the way, so I'm not one of those, but I think they're in a lot of ways fantastic dogs. So but where a lot of that fear comes from is I kind of refer to it as or some of these reactivity or aggression cases. We've all pretty much like had a boss at some point in our jobs that maybe got promoted that shouldn't have. They our family member or something like that of the owner of the company or something along those lines. And really they got promoted above people that they shouldn't have, and they don't know how to lead. And when they don't know how to lead, they're put in a position that they're not qualified for, and they don't do it properly. And what happens is when we lack structure in the home and we are not the good boss, the one that everybody wants to work for, and we're not providing that structure, guidance, and giving very direct cues to what we want and expect from our dogs, then the dog feels that it needs to step up into that role. And the dog is unqualified. Again, we kind of talked about the different types of dogs versus forward aggression or fear aggression, things like that. Rarely is a dog truly that forward. Most dogs don't want to be leaders. Most humans don't want to be leaders, right? Like that's why, you know, a lot of us are perfectly content working for a company like yours, where we just kind of, here's what's going on. We can just kind of do our thing of where we know we fit in this box, and you can handle the business aspect of it and all the things that we don't know how to do, right? So you know, again, like most people are followers as well. There's nothing wrong with that. We need both in the world. Excuse me. So a lot of these reactivity and aggression and fear, it does stem from the home because we aren't being that proper boss, that proper leader that the dog needs. So too much freedom, you know, allowing the dog to run amok and do anything it wants. Well, one, there's a lot of self-rewarding behaviors there, right? You know, the dog that's fence fighting and being aggressive, that's a rewarding behavior. The dog's having a blast doing that. And so, you know, it's getting into there. Us allowing the dogs to, you know, sleep on the bed. We don't crate train. We don't do any of these things to create certain boundaries. Well, that's going to lead to some of this, some of these reactive or aggression cases as well. If we are inherently a super anxious person or nervous person, and we go out, you know, out in town, and every time we're walking around, we're super tense, that's feeding down the leash. And what's happening is the dog, especially if it's not one of those super confident outward, you know, outly going dogs, well, now it's like, why is dad, you know, stressed out? Why is mom stressed out? It must be that thing over there. I must react to that thing to scare it away. And so that's where a lot of that stems from. And so we need to be able to take control. We need to set boundaries. I like to say dog training is kind of like a rat maze where we're opening doors to behaviors that we like, and we're just closing doors to behaviors we don't. And, you know, a lot of times I don't say good or bad behavior. I say wanted or unwanted behavior. And the reason is there's behaviors that like may not bother me, but you may hate. You know, Jasmine and I moved in together about a year and a half ago. I loved the dogs on the couch in my bed and everything else. And she's like, nope, I actually have nice clothes and don't want dog hair on everything. And so no dogs on furniture. And I'm like, okay, well, who's right or wrong? Clearly I am. No, I'm just kidding. But, you know, really neither one of us are right or wrong. It's just personal preference. Now, when we get into structure, a lot of times people, and this is a question I actually just recently had with one of our clients as well, was, well, does that mean I can't ever love on my dog? Absolutely not. That's not what that means. Like, the whole reason we have dogs, we have that companionship, we have that affection, we have that love. That's the whole reason I got into dog training, was when I was getting out of the Marine Corps and I was, used to having my buddies around me all the time. And I'm like, well, what the heck? I need a companion, right? And so that's why we have our dogs, is we want that best friend, happy-go-lucky, go everywhere, do everything, dog. But we have to build up to that point. And again, we can't rush that either. And where that point of how much freedom a dog can handle versus, how much structure they need, that's going to be dog dependent as well. And just like humans and those parents out there and stuff like that will understand this too, is it's just like kids. They're going to have their good days and bad days. So, the dog has a bad day. Cool. Take away the PlayStation, right? We're going to add a little bit of structure and, hone it in for a day or two. And then maybe we'll try to give it some freedom again. But at the same time, like, we really, really, really need to hone in on the structure. And it's always easier to give freedom than it is to take it away. And so we need to start on the strict side. And so that kind of goes back to, even after a board and train, I tell all of our clients, when I bring the dog home from a board and train, that's where the training actually starts. And that's where the work really begins. And we come in place. And so I kind of set forth, and rescues used to do this a lot. When I first started with dogs, it was talked about all the time, and they used to call it a 2-week shutdown. Rescues have kind of gotten away from it, and I haven't heard of it in years and years and years. That being said, in 2020, actually, there was a new study that came out talking about 3 weeks to kind of change behaviors and things like that. And so I tell the clients, for the first 3 weeks that the dog comes home, we need to go to like solitary confinement kind of boot camp. And it's not to be scary. We're going to find a realistic routine that works for everybody. As a dog trainer, if I tell the client, hey, for 18 hours a day, you have to do X, Y, Z, they're going to be like, go F yourself. That's not going to happen. So, realistically, I try to find with their individual schedule, okay, where can I get what I think the dog needs and figure that out, but what's realistic for them and what they're going to be able to do. So I incorporate some training games and different things where they can train from the couch. I find that is a very useful tool, because people are more apt to train from the couch than they are if I tell them to go out with their dog, for 2 hours a day. So we incorporate a lot of games there, but at the same time, we're incorporating a lot of structure and kind of trying to hit that reset button for that first 3 weeks. And then we can start introducing some freedoms or more freedom to there. The other aspect to this is we have to remember, again, going back to the primitive aspects of the dogs are den animals. They don't need as much freedom as we give them. When do we see coyotes, wolves? Realistically, it's any predatory animal. For those of us that go, out in the wilderness all the time and hike and things like that, like, when do you see the predatory animals? Dawn and dusk. It's when they're hunting. Otherwise, they're denned up all day. And so, I kind of learned this the hard way as well. Like with some of the police dogs, I had my whole entire yard set up with this awesome kennel system. And every time I look at the cameras, they're just in there sleeping. And I'm like, well, why do I have these super high drive, crazy Malinois and Dutch Shepherds? And every time I look at them, they're sleeping. And of course, as soon as I walk out there, they're bouncing off the walls. And it's like, all right, well, sure, when I'm there, they're bouncing off the walls because they want to go do something. They know when I'm there, fun's about to happen. And so, all right, well, if they're just going to be sleeping, I can put them in a crate. And in a lot of ways, they want that. Going back to some of the things that we create at home, the crate also becomes a dog's safe space. So whether we're talking about aggression, reactivity, or even a dog with severe anxiety that's just scared of the world, well, the crate is kind of the same thing for all of these things, going back to that root cause. We give the dog a chance to go somewhere safe where it knows it's not going to get messed with, it's not going to get looked at, poked, prodded, or anything else. It's got a safe space to go and decompress. Dogs do not handle stress the way humans do. With dogs, it's compounding stress. It builds and builds and builds until eventually it erupts. And a lot of times we're trying to fix the eruption instead of giving them a place to decompress and relieve some of that stress.
This is great stuff here. I mean, one of the things I also want to bring up, you talked about the anxiety. Like, everyone's stressed out these days, right? I mean, we've got elections, we got all this crap happening in the world, and everyone's all stressed out over everything. and they don't realize the effect it has on their dog. And then when we're talking about aggression, every time these dogs have these episodes, whatever it be reactivity or a potential bite or an attempted bite, every time that's not being addressed, we are making that behavior harder to undo on the back end. So we know a lot of people who are really stressed out and just don't want to deal with it. And maybe, the new year, new me thing, they're going to go deal with it next, in January versus dealing with it now. That's something that we know that is not a good tactic. It actually makes the behavior a lot worse and can actually lead to somebody actually getting hurt in the process. And that's why we want to bring that up. But for an owner who's new to dog trainings, new to dogs in general, and starting to see aggressive stuff, and they're approaching training companies, I mean, what kind of questions would you be asking, and what kind of red flags would you be looking for in a program that's being presented to them that's supposed to address some whatever aggression that they're reporting?
Great question. And before I get to that, I do want to touch on one other thing when we were talking about the anxiety. A lot of times people don't realize, especially if they have had a dog that's reacted or something in the past, they see something that the dog may have reacted to and they tense up and they pull on the leash. My example for that is kind of me when I'm drunk at the bar, right? Hold me back. And then as soon as you let me go, I'm like, I don't want to do that. And so we have to be really careful with that. A lot of times it becomes second nature and we're just unsure. We don't even realize we're doing it half the time. And when people kind of going back to what you said, try to fix it themselves and go, and they just keep making the problem worse, it's because they're actually creating that habit in themselves where there's, another dog, there's a guy in a hat with sunglasses. They tense up, the dog immediately goes, and almost without a doubt, the human doesn't even realize that they're doing it. And it's like, you are the one setting your dog off. A lot of times we hear in a board and train, like a lot of us trainers, like we don't always see the aggression or the reactivity come up. And the clients are always like, well, why is that? Well, one, we're professionals. We do this all day, every day. And we're not saying that the dog may not react, but we're confident enough in our skills and our abilities that even if the dog reacted, we're like, all right. And I've embarrassed myself plenty. So it doesn't embarrass me if I have a dog that is reactive or anything like that. So I did want to touch on that as well. But going back to what you're looking for with training companies, I'll get into a couple of things that are actually just like kind of pet peeves of mine as well. The more people get to know me, the more they know I have a lot of those. But one is a training company that's going to make you a promise. At the end of the day, we're dealing with living, breathing animals that we have no idea what your dog really is. We know your description, but your description of, hey, my dog's a complete Cujo monster, versus those of us that work with dogs for a living that have worked with thousands of dogs, what's a Cujo monster to you may be not anything major to us, or vice versa. And so all of our experiences and things like that with the dogs are different. So anybody that's making a promise, well, again, living, breathing animal, we don't know your dog. And at the end of the day, like we also don't know how much the human side is going to follow through. And so we can't make promises. And unfortunately, we live in a, world of technology these days. It's really easy for us. Hey, my iPhone's broken, and it's really easy for me to take it to the shop and expect that when I get it out of the shop, that cracked screen is going to be 100% fixed. Sure. But dogs are not that way. We can't just hit a reset button. We can't just reprogram them. We have to constantly evolve our relationship, no different than any other relationship, whether it's, marriage, boyfriend, girlfriend, friendship, it doesn't matter. They're always evolving, and we can't control that. So again, making promises that they can fix a behavior. I hate that word anyways, because we're not fixing behaviors. We're learning how to manage the dog, and to where you may never see those behaviors again, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not in there somewhere and can revert back if we don't follow through with what we're supposed to do. Other things are training companies, and we've touched on it a little bit too, but that are just trying to get you in the door and selling you a program that is too short for what you need. So again, like there are some very big name training companies out there that, will take an aggression case and say they can do it in 2 weeks. And just to be blunt about it, how they're doing that, I've had multiple of those trainers, applied to work with me. I know you've had a lot apply to work with you guys as well. And every time I've worked with them and tried to see what they're doing, their method is, when we get into e-collar methods and things like that, slap an e-collar on the dog on like day 2. And now we are, for lack of a better way to describe it, frying the crap out of the dog until it does what we want. Well, we're not actually addressing anything there. We're not fixing anything. And if anything, we're making it worse because we are just shutting the dog down. And the goal of dog training, like I got into this because I love dogs, and I don't want to shut a dog down. I want the dog to be who it is. And that's always a fear question that we get from clients as well is, you're using prong collars and e-collars. Is it going to change who my dog is? I like their goofy personality. Absolutely not. If anything, the prong collar and e-collar should be a sign of freedom to the dog that they're getting to go do something. If I take any of my dogs, I always say I'm going to make a video of this and I never do, but if I take any of my personal dogs and I take their e-collars and I just hold it like this, they will run full speed and shove their head in it because they know it means we're about to go do something really, really fun. That's what that should mean. Obedience equals freedom. So, the more obedient our dog, the more freedom they can have. So, training companies that, I don't think there's any 2-week program out there that should really exist short of maybe a very, very entry level puppy one. And that's because at that point, we're kind of just teaching them how to learn and how to grow and things like that at that point. Other red flags, trainers that don't want to use food and don't want to use really any training tool whatsoever. If they are extremely against, prong collars, e-collars, or food, those are kind of my 3 major ones there, like, go away. You have no business doing that, right? Like, we all operate differently, and what works for one dog may not work for another. There's no cookie cutter kind of approach to this. Like, all of us as trainers have kind of our go-to moves, if you will. We know what's kind of worked for us for the most part in the past, and those are the things we're going to try first, but it doesn't always work. Some dogs are not food motivated. That's fine. We can go to different pressure techniques or things like that. That being said, a lot of times, a lot of our dogs are actually food motivated. Either 1, our dogs are overweight. 2, they're free fed. So we've never had to create that kind of drive to have to work for their food. And so that's missing. And in most cases, by end of week 1, early week 2, I can have dogs, just about any dog, working for food. That's not an absolute, like there's always the ones out there that won't, but most will once they learn that that's kind of how they're getting it. And so, yeah, like trainers that don't want to use food, prong collars, e-collars, or toys. Again, I know, like, with Koru K9, we're kind of always with the 4 psychological quadrants there, we're almost bouncing around through them like a, ping pong ball. I'm constantly going, negative reinforcement, maybe some negative punishment, positive reinforcement. We're bouncing around, between those 3 mostly, almost constantly within minutes of a training session. And that's what we should be able to do and recognize. So those are our red flags. Again, promises, trainers that are reluctant to use different things. I'm also big training companies. And for those out there, like, I actually owned one for a while and stuff as well. And there's pros and cons to it. I like the way they do it, but a lot of these big training facilities, the dogs never leave the facility. And I understand why they're doing that. They're doing that for some liability on their part and things like that. But realistically, the dog is now in a, very sanitary environment, if you will. The dog learns how to get really good at those skills in that environment. And one of my favorite reasons that I came back to doing this, out of the house, is it forces us to now take the dog out in public, right? It forces us to go work these dogs in these real world environments that the client is going to have to deal with, right? Doing these out of our house, the dog is also working through, hey, when we're having family dinner time, maybe the dog's on a police command and learning how to not beg at the table and do all these things. It's getting real life, real scenarios instead of just, hey, we get it out of its kennel, we take it down to our training field, we run it through this series of exercises, and then we put it back. And, you know, that can do some things great, but it's lacking, I think, in my opinion, a lot of different things. And so that's what I would look for as a training company that is taking the dog off site and doing field trips and getting it out into the real world to help kind of see that. So those are some red flags I would see there as well. And again, just the salesman aspect of training companies, especially as, you know, times get hard with things and things like that. And we're trying to make the sale. Again, just those promises that are being made that we realistically can't follow through with because we don't know. And that's, again, what I always encourage everybody is, you know, if it feels like you're talking to a used car salesman, chances are you are. So that's kind of, I guess, my answer there.
That was literally perfect. I think it's a great way to end, but I do want to add one little story. I was laughing so hard when you were talking about the energy flowing down leash of anxiety, aggression. And I'm laughing because I'm a trainer. And for those of you that have stuck around this whole episode, Jeremy and I used to work together. And I remember, Jeremy, when you came out to our club in Colorado, and this is when I was like in the thick of having a hard time with Cairo, my dog. And I was like, oh, I got to get him out of the car. We got to do this again. And Jeremy called me out because I was doing that. I was expecting my dog to behave like a jerk when I got him out of the car, and Jeremy called me out on it. So I want owners to understand that it's not just you. I mean, even I needed to be called out on that kind of stuff. So don't be afraid to ask for help. Certainly don't wait to ask for help. Even now, we know the election's coming up and everyone's feeling it. Now's the right time to do this. If anything, gets your dog out of your hair too. But Jeremy, this was great. I feel like we could go on and on and on. There was so many little notes that I took that I hope that you come back, that we can dive in even deeper on it. But I hope everybody enjoyed this. We will be back again soon. We have 2 more coming up next week that will be dropping your way. As always, you can find us at KoruK9.com, all of the social platforms at Koru K9.